So, continuing to talk about NGRX. NGRX provide us several packages where the main goal of those packages is to help us do state management. So NGRX is a Redux-inspired state management solution, which is the most popular state management solution that is currently used by Angular. The previous lesson, we talked about the state that is held by NGRX. The state is an immutable, serialized object, and we talked about best practices and how exactly that state looks like. In this lesson, we're going to talk about the store that is a singleton service that holds the state. So in this lesson, we're going to focus and talk about NGRX Store. Now, the store is a service. And that service holds the state, the same state that we talked about in the previous lesson, the NGRX state. So the store is a service that holds that state. Now remember from the previous lesson, we mentioned that the state is we only have one state, and it's immutable and it's a serialized object, but we only have one state. So because we have only one state, NGRX makes sure that the store service, we have only one store service. So the store service is a singleton. It can only create one instance of the store service, not more. So the store service is a singleton service, and that singleton service is provided in an NGRX package called NGRX Store. NGRX Store is the main package, the main implementation of NGRX state management. The main implementation of the Redux state management that NGRX provide us is located in the package NGRX Store. And the store service is a part of that package. So we're going to install NGRX. To actually learn about the NGRX store, we have to try and interact with it. So what we'll do next is we'll create a new Angular project, and we're going to install the package NGRX Store, and then we're going to interact with the store service and learn about the store service by actually writing code and interacting with that service. So let's start by opening your terminal or CMD in whatever folder you want, and we'll start by creating a new Angular project. So we'll do the command npx Angular CLI new, and let's name our project Store Tutorial. We're going to give Angular CLI a few seconds to create a project. It will probably ask us a few questions about our project. So the first question would be if we want routing. Let's say that we don't want routing, and which style sheet. We won't focus on style sheet, so I'm going to pick CSS. We'll give it a few seconds to create a new Angular project, and then we're going to install the package NGRX Store, which holds the store service. So our project is now has been created by Angular CLI. Let's open the project with Visual Studio Code. So a new folder, Store Tutorial, was created for us. So let's cd into this folder that Angular CLI created the project in, and open VS Code in that in our project root folder. Now, okay, so some dialogues here. Now this is our project. Let's install NGRX Store. So most of NGRX packages, I think even all of NGRX packages, have a shortcut ng-add installation command. Now ng-add does like an npm install, plus it's going to change some Angular files. For example, it's going to add the proper modules to our root module. So it's not only going to do npm install, but it's going to modify our Angular files a bit, so the proper package is installed and the proper modules are updated as well. So let's take the command npx ng-add NGRX Store latest to install the NGRX Store package. So I'm going to open VS Code, I'm going to open the terminal, and I'm going to run the command npx ng-add NGRX Store, and we're installing the latest. At the time of this video, the latest is NGRX. If we go to the docs, the latest is version 13.0.2. So this is the version we're installing, and it's going to ask a few questions. The package store latest will be installed and executed. Would you like to proceed? Let's answer yes, and let's give it some time to do npm install and modify our Angular files. Okay, so let's see what happened here. So it's installing the package, and it's also updated the app module.ts file. Let's see the update. So let's open the app module.ts file, and we can see the update that was made by doing the ng-add command. So not only did it npm install NGRX Store, but it's also changed the app module. App module is our root module inside the app. And inside the app folder, there's the root module app module, and inside it took the store module and added in the imports array, and it added store module for root. Now, when you add the for root in the imports, this is going to subscribe the store service to the root injector. So this will basically mean that the store service will be available for you. It will add the proper providers to add the store service in the root injector of the dependency injector, making sure, because you only call for root once, and in the app module, this makes sure that the store service will only be created once. So great, that installs NGRX Store. Now, to properly examine what our store holds, we're going to install another package, and that package is called NGRX Store DevTools. And that package allows us to examine what the store holds, what state does our store service holds. With the package, we can examine the store. It's basically development tools. It's exposed in the Chrome developer tools, and you can inspect the NGRX state that is held by the store. So you not only can inspect the current state in the store, you can actually see how the state reached its current position. So you have like a history of how the state got to where it is now. And basically, you see it with a browser extension. So after we install the package, we're going to install a Chrome extension, and then you will see the store content, the store developer tools you see in your Chrome developer tools. And the command to install it, again, NGRX packages comes with easy installation using the ng-add command. So the command to install it is ng-add NGRX Store DevTools latest. So let's install the Store DevTools, go back to our IDE, open the terminal, and do the command npx ng-add NGRX Store DevTools latest. And this will install another NGRX package, which will allow us to inspect the content of our store service, to inspect our state. So would we like to be installed? Let's answer yes, and wait a few seconds for this package to be installed. Okay, so I see that it's now finished installing, and you'll see that the app module is updated again. So not only did npm install of the NGRX Store DevTools of the package installed, the command ng-end also updated app module, and it added Store DevTools modules to the imports array. So now we have the Store DevTools installed. Let's see what happens when we do ng-serve. So let's launch our app with an ng-serve. Wait a few seconds for Angular to launch the development server, and in the meantime, let's open a browser and go to localhost 4200 and see the Angular hello world screen. Now we want to inspect our store, so we have to install an extension. The package that we just installed, the Store DevTools, allow us to inspect the store via a Chrome extension. So go to Google and type Redux DevTools, and it will launch, and you will see the first link will be a link to a Chrome extension. I'm going to click Add to Chrome. I'm going to install the extension. And after the extension is installed, let's go back to our app. Now, after our extension is installed, we can close the developer tools, open it again, and now you see a new tab of Redux. That tab allows you to inspect the store service, to inspect NGRX state, which our state is basically nothing at the moment because we didn't load anything to our state. So our state is undefined. But now we can actually examine the store and the state that the store holds. Okay, now let's load some data to our store. So let's do this. Let's go and add some root state to our app module state. And what we'll do, we'll add a state that basically that state is, let's say you have the app module, and that app module want to add something to the state. So we'll add in our state, the app module would want to add user information. So this is how we want our state to look like. We want our state to contain a key of user and some data about that user, like his first name and last name. So let's go back to our IDE and let's load some data to our store. So try to recall the previous lesson when we talked about the state. We said that if a module wants to add something to the state, what usually I do in my project, if the app module wants to add something to the state, so I'm going to create a folder called state. And inside that folder state, I'm going to add the proper state actions, reducers that describe what is the state that the app wants to add. So let's start with the app wants to add a user state. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an interface, and let's call that interface user state, and it describes what we want to add. So everything in my state, I'm creating an interface that describes exactly what my state looks like. So my user state has a first name, which is a string, and a last name, which is a string. Great, because this is what our user state has. Two keys, first name and last name. Great. Now I'm going to create a user.reducer. Now we didn't learn what a reducer is yet. We will learn it in not the next lesson, the one after that, we'll talk about reducers. So for now, I don't want to expand about reducers. So for the sake of this lesson, since we're not going to focus on reducers, reducers will simply be a function that gets an argument and return that argument. So I'm going to create a function called user reducer, which is a function that gets a state. Let's create a function called user reducer, which is a function which gets a state and return the state. Okay, and let's say that state is of type let's say of type any to make things a bit easier. So our reducer, which we'll talk about in the next lessons. For now, we're not going to expand. We're simply going to do a simple function that gets a state and returns a state, and what we're going to do here, which we're going to initialize the user state. So our state, we're going to give it an initial value where we give it a first name of academies, and a last name, let's say open source programming lessons. Okay, so let's get an initial state, first name and last name. Great. Okay, so you initialize the state usually in the reducers, and we're going to talk about the reducers and expand more about the state initialization. But for now, the user reducer gets the initial state, first name, last name, and then simply a function that returns that state. Great. So let's create also an index file in the state folder. Let's create an index. And in here, we're going to export what we want to be exported from our user state module. So we're going to export from everything from the file user reducer and export everything from the file user state. Great. Now let's load our state. Now let's go back to the app module. And in the app module, we're going to store where we have the store module for root. And the first argument we have here is a list of our reducer, a key value of our reducer. So if we have a key of user, we're going to add a user, and the reducer that is in charge of this section of data. In our case, it's the user reducer. And now we go back to our app, we'll see that we have a key user with first name and last name. Great, so we managed to load data in our store. And the way we did that, we created a folder called state, and we created a user reducer that inside that user reducer, we're initializing the state of the user. And inside the app module, we're saying the part of the state that is the key user, the reducer that is in charge of this section is called the user reducer. and we're given a link to our function that we created in the state. And now we can examine our state, and we see we have a key of user and a first name and a last name. So we managed to eagerly load initial data for our user and populate the state that our store holds. Now let's load a bit more data to our store. But now we're going to load lazy loaded data to our store. So this is going to be data that is not initially loaded, and only when the user navigates to a certain screen, then we're fetching and grabbing that data and loading it to the memory. So think about lazy loading in general. The concept is that Angular gives us very easy tools to not load all the screens, rather load them lazily when the user actually navigates to those screens. And this saves us memory and reduce the bundle size that we need to give the user, thus making the app more faster. The same concept applies to the data that you're holding in the memory. So your loading NGRX state is held in memory, and you don't want to load unnecessary data in the memory. So you might want some data to lazy load when it's actually needed. Basically, the rule of thumb is that you need to load in the memory what the user is currently seeing on the screen, maybe a bit more if you're prefetching some data, but you don't load the entire tables and database in your memory. And it's best to lazy load the data, and it's also best to at times inspect what you're holding in the state. What is the amount of data that you're holding in the state? Because one case that I remember that I got a complaint about an Angular app that is working very slow, and I keep to examine that app. And then I saw that they are holding in their NGRX state, they're holding entire tables from the database. So their state was consumed a lot of space. And it's not best practices, and it's especially noticeable on mobile devices. They didn't quite understand why the app works so slow on mobile devices, and when we inspect the memory, we saw how much memory was held in the state, and that was the main cause of the problem. So you basically want to load what the user is seeing on screen, maybe prefetch a bit more, but do not load entire data that the user doesn't see, which will make your app work slow. So in this part, we will try to lazy load data to our NGRX. So it's recommended to hold data in NGRX, hold that the state that you're holding is pretty much what the user is seeing on the screen, and you're not loading additional data that will overcrowd your memory. And one of the things that NGRX gives you is an easy way to lazy load state data. So only when the user navigates to a certain screen, or only when something happens, you load some data in the lazy way fashion. So what we'll do in this exercise is going to lazy load a module with that containing some state data. So we're going to lazy load a module, and that module will add some data to our state. And this is how our state will look like after this exercise. We have the user state that we loaded. We're going to also have a lazy state with an array of books. Now, the array of books, let's imagine that it's a big array. We don't want to load it in memory unless the user navigates to a certain screen. So that's why this data is not loaded. We're going to load it lazy only when the user navigates to a certain screen. Okay, so let's go back to our IDE and let's generate the lazy loaded module. So I'm going to exit the serve. I'm going to use Angular CLI, and I'm going to create npx ng generate a module or M, and I'm going to generate a module called lazy. Okay, so a file is created in the source lazy, a file called lazy module ts. So we now have, beside our app, we have a module called lazy module. Now, this lazy module, I want this lazy module to add data to the state. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add a folder called state. And in here, I'm going to create a file called lazy state. And in this file, I'm going to create the interface that describes the state that the lazy module is adding to NGRX state. And this is an interface. We'll call this interface lazy state. And that interface, I remind you what we want to add. We want to add an array of books. So that interface has a books array. And the books array, basically each book contain an ID and a title. So let's say our books is an array that each item of the array has an ID, which is a number, and a title, which is a string. Great. So this has created our lazy state. Now we want to add some initial data to our state, some initial books array. So we're going to create, like we did before, a lazy reducer. And one of the things that the reducer is in charge of is initializing the state via a reducer. And we'll expand more on this when we talk about our lessons about reducer, but the reducer is basically a function. So let's create a lazy reducer, which is a function, and that function will get an argument of a state and return a state. Our reducer doesn't do much, but what we can do in the reducer is initialize the state, initialize our books array. And our state looks like an object containing books, and the books has an initial value of an array, and we can place value in that array. For example, ID 1 and title The Shining. Let's say ID 2 and title Lord of the Rings. Great. So imagine that this array is a big array, contains a lot of values that you want to load. Remember that you don't need to load huge arrays. It's recommended to do pagination. Load what the user sees. The user probably won't see on screen 1,000 books. He will probably see like 10. So even though that array might be big in terms of every element might have a lot of data, you shouldn't load all your books from the database in this array. But let's say our books, we do want to preserve memory. We don't want to load the books even though we do pagination and we do consider the memory. We want to lazy load that books array. Great. So we created a reducer and initialize the books array. Now let's go to the lazy module. So the lazy module is adding data to our state and it's interacting with NGRX. So what we need to do, we need to add in the imports the store module, but this time we need to add for feature. For root is only added once and it's added in the app module. We created a store module for root, and you call for root only once, usually in the app module. In the other modules that needs the store, that needs NGRX, that want to add data to the store, they use the store module, but they use for feature. And for feature, let's see what it gets. The first element it gets is a feature name. Now the feature name is where it's going to load the data. So a feature name is lazy. So let's add a feature name lazy. And the second element is an object of is an object with the list of reducers, key value of reducers. So we have books, and the one that is in charge of it is our lazy reducer. Let's call her the books reducer, and it's not gonna have, the state will be an array. It's not an object with an array, it's simply going to be an array because the object, we're loading only the books. So let's place books reducer here. So the lazy has a books key, and whoever in charge of the books array is the books reducer. The books reducer initializing that array with some data. Great. And this module is lazy loaded only when you go to a certain navigation route. So let's try to load our app. We'll do ngserve and see the results we have so far. So remember, we are not loading the lazy module. So whatever we placed here, the books, we shouldn't see it in the state yet because we didn't load it yet. We didn't reach that module yet. So now we'll go back to our browser. We only see user. We don't see books because we haven't loaded those books. We didn't load this module yet. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add navigation and lazy loading, the module we just created, and we're going to see how our state is updated and the books are added. So let's lazy load our new module and see that state updated. So let's go to in our IDE, let's add some routing. Okay, so we're going to load the lazy module that we created. We're going to lazy load it using the routing, the load children in Angular router. So what we're going to do is we're going to the app module, and in the imports, we're going to add a router module. Let's import the router module from Angular router. And we're going to import the router module. Okay, now usually you want to create the routing module in a separate file and separate the logic of the routing in a separate module. We're not going to do it, but we have an entire lesson about routing where we cover the best practices. In here, I'm just going to quickly create router module and add it straight in the app module. Sorry, it's not the best practice, but it's not our main focus in this lesson. So we're gonna do a router module for route, and we're going to add an array of routes. And in here, we're going to say that if we're going to a path of lazy, then what we're going to do is load children, and load children gets a function, and a sync function, a function that return promise, and we're going to lazy load using dynamic import. We're going to import the lazy module, and we're gonna dynamic import returns a promise, so we can place a wait here, and in here we'll get the file, the module, and we can extract from the file our lazy module class, and we'll return the lazy module class. Great. So this is our path. When we go to the path lazy, we are lazy loading our module. Now let's go back to our lazy module, and in here we're going to add a router module. We're going to import from Angular router. We're going to import the router module, and the router module, we're going to add it in the imports array, and we're going to add a for child. And in here we're going to place an array of our routes, and we're going to say if we have a path, an empty path, the empty path means lazy, because in the router module for route, we lazy load the children on path lazy. So in here, you only need the empty path because it's appended to what we mentioned the path before, to the lazy. So we'll load a component. Let's go and let's create a component. We'll call this component hello lazy component. Let's generate this component, this hello lazy component. So I'm going to go to the lazy folder, cd source lazy. So because I want to cd to the lazy folder, so the component hello lazy component will create in this module, the lazy module. So in here I'm going to do npx ng generate, or g component, or c, we'll call it hello lazy. And we're going to say that our component has an inline template and inline style. Is it style or styles? Anyway, let's generate. Maybe it will error out. No, it's inline style. Okay, so it's created the hello lazy component, and now our component, the hello lazy component, simply displayed hello lazy works. We're going to add it as the default. And in the lazy module, we have the hello lazy component added in the declaration. So now our path has a hello lazy component, and we can load. We're loading this component when we're going to the path lazy. To finish up, we of course need in the app component template, we need to add a router outlet. Okay, and let's add a link with navigate to lazy, with a link with a router link that navigates to the path lazy. Okay, so now let's try our app. We'll do ng serve. Let's see if it works. Okay, so now we have navigate to lazy. First of all, let's see that our lazy loading is working. So we'll go to the network tab, and we're gonna filter by JavaScript files. We can clear everything out, and if the lazy loading is working, in the network tab you see a new JavaScript is loaded when you navigate to lazy. So let's click navigate to lazy. Great, we see a JavaScript file is loaded, and the hello lazy works is displayed, and the path has changed, and everything is lazy loaded. It's everything is lazy loaded nicely. Let's go back to the root again, and now let's examine our store. So let's go back to the Redux tab. When we are in the root, what we see is only the user key. But when we navigate to lazy, let's see what happens. We see update reducer action happens, and data, the lazy and the books are lazy loaded only when you navigate to a certain path. Now, so we see that we managed to load the data in a lazy fashion. We still have to also, sometimes you also need to clear your state, clear the data, but we'll cover on the reducer lessons about add reducer and remove reducer. So there's also a more dynamic way to add data and remove data other than lazy load modules, but the concept needs to be clear. The memory that you're holding, the state that you're holding in memory does not need to be 100 megabyte, 200 megabytes. You don't have to load entire tables, entire database. You need to load what the user is seeing, maybe a bit more. And load more when the user navigates to a certain screen, load more, and maybe clear some data, clear some memory when the user navigates, because maybe if he navigates away from the lazy, we can clear out the books and save memory. So memory is something that we need to examine when we're holding, maybe when our app turns slow, and maybe in a mobile device it works slow, and we need to make sure that we're holding the data that we need in the state and not overcrowding or overpopulating the memory. Lazy loading applies also to NGRX state. So let's examine how much memory do we consume. How much memory does the NGRX state now holds? And this will be our next exercise. We're going to examine memory consumption. So in NGRX app, usually the majority of our memory of the data that we're holding in memory would probably be inside the NGRX store. So it's going to be a bit easier probably because the majority of data would be in the store. You can examine the store with the Redux dev tools, and now we would see how we can examine the memory of the NGRX store that the store holds. And you should be aware of how much memory your app consumes and how much memory your store consumes, and try to maybe see if you're holding memory that the user doesn't really see, and maybe you need to clear some area of your state to preserve memory. So we'll now examine how much memory our state holds in this exercise. So what we're going to do is JavaScript is holding the variables, the memory variables inside a data structure called heap. And the heap is a data structure that holds the variables that you preserve in the memory. And the dev tools allow you to inspect the heap to see how much memory is consumed and in which variables hold which memory. So you can optimize the heap and examine the heap with that tool. So what we'll do now is take a snapshot of the heap and examine how much our store occupies from the entire heap, how much our store occupies in terms of memory. So let's go back to our browser, and in the browser we loaded the lazy. Let's start with not loading the lazy and go to the root path when the lazy is not loaded, and all we have in the state is the user key. So we can examine our memory by going to the memory tab, and in here we can grab a heap snapshot. Remember that your variables, array, NGRX state are held in a data structure called heap, and you can examine that heap to see how much memory you consume. So let's take a heap snapshot before we load all the lazy data. We'll take a heap snapshot. Our memory is 4.2 megabyte, and we can search for the store. And in NGRX apps, probably the majority of your memory will be held in the store. So it's important to examine if your app works slow. Examine this. You might see that your store holds too much data. So our store currently holds 304 retained size and shallow size of 76. Shallow size is the actual data that we're holding, and retained size is what will be freed when the store is cleared from memory. So sometimes object in the heap references other object and prevents them from clearing up. So the retained is how much will be cleared. So it's usually more than the shallow size. Okay, so we have the store here, which consumes 76 and 300 before. This is before we loaded our lazy data. So right now, let's navigate to lazy, and hello, lazy works. Let's take another heap snapshot. We see that our memory grew up a bit from the fact that we now consume more data in our NGRX store, more another module, another store feature module, another lazy reducer, and the state that it holds. We can now hold the search for store here, and we see that we now have the store, and we have also another store feature module. So our data is now 276 plus 240. This is what our store holds, which is a bit more than what we had before. So the shallow size is still 76. The shallow size didn't change of the store, but we now have a store feature module which holds another 68. So memory consumption grew, and you can check the heap snapshot and search for a store to examine how much memory you consume. You can disregard the store dev tools. The store dev tools and the store dev tools module, you can ignore that. This only works on development. This is the default behavior that only on your localhost development server, the store dev tools will work. So you can disregard this. In production, it won't be available. But the store and store feature model are important to examine if your app works slow, if your apps work slow on mobile. Examine the memory consumption. Make sure you lazy load. Make sure if your user navigates away, you clear certain areas of the memory that from the state, clear certain things from the state. We'll learn about clearing stuff from the state. You have the add reducer, remove reducer API to clear stuff from the state. We'll examine these API on the reducer lesson, but it is important to be aware of how much memory you consume in your NGRX store. So now let's move on to the store service, our main focus of the lesson, to actually interact with the store service. Now that we have populated the state and lazy loaded data to the state, we can now examine the store service. So let's go back to our IDE and go back to our app component. And the store service, like other services in Angular, can be dependency injected, and usually we do it in the constructor. So we're gonna ask for the store service from the dependency injector in the constructor, and we can examine the store service. We can examine what type it is by command clicking the store or control clicking the store and see the declaration of the store service. So we can see one important aspect of the store service that we have to remember, that the store service extends observable. So the store service is actually a kind of observable. Now the store service, this is how you interact with the NGRX state. You use the service so you can read data from your NGRX state. You use the service to dispatch changes to the NGRX state. So this is the main service you will use to interact with the NGRX state. And you see that this service extends an observable. Now, it's very important. This is an RxJS observable. So the store extends observable, which means that when you interact with NGRX, when you use the store to interact with the state, it is highly recommended that you learn thoroughly about the RxJS library and about observable. There is a lot of, you will often use the store service combined with RxJS operators to interact with the state. So you really need to know well the RxJS library. So it's highly recommended that if you do not feel secure with the RxJS library, we have beginner and expert lessons about the RxJS library. There are links in this lesson page. So please follow those lessons before you jump into NGRX. Now the store extends an observable, which means it emits data when you subscribe to it. So basically the store is an observable, and we can describe the store with a marble diagram. Now the store is an observable which, when you subscribe to it, emits. So when we subscribe to an observable, we have to know what that observable emits. So the store service is an observable that emits the state. So every time your state is changing, that observable will emit a value. Okay, so let's try to experiment with this fact. Let's go back to our app component, and now that we know that our store service is actually an observable, I'll add a suffix of $. I like to do it for observables, and let's make the store public. And we can see what the store holds by going to the template appcomponent.html, and in here we can add a paragraph and add read the store and subscribe to it with an async pipe. Remember, the async pipe allows you to subscribe to an observable inside your template without the need to actually use the subscribe function and nest the function. And since our state is an object, it's best to prettify that object, to stringify that object with the JSON pipe. So I subscribe to the store and I print the object. Now we have an entire lesson. The next lesson will be how to read from the state, because there is a lot of best practices, selectors, change detection stuff that you can improve the performance. So there's a lot of things about reading the state that I want to focus about. So I have an entire lesson. The next lesson will be about the reading the state. This is not how you read the state. This is just to see the content of the store observable, which basically is our state. So now let's see in our app. Let's reload our app, and this is the content of our. Let's close this. This is the current content of the current state that the store holds. And if we navigate to lazy, we see that our current state has a user key and a lazy key with the books. So we see it updated. So we see that the store service is an observable that emits the state every time the state change. So we started with a user, and then our state changed, and we see the state updated here. So the store service is an observable and that emits the state. So to summarize this lesson, the store service, as we mentioned, is an observable which emits the current state. It's highly important that you learn the RxJS observable library and operators and really control that library before stepping in NGRX. So the store is a service. You can dependency inject that service, and this is the service that you use to read the state and dispatch changes to the state. So this is the store service that holds the state, and you interact with the state using this service. State can be lazy loaded. So it's important to be mindful of what your state holds. Do I really need all the state, or maybe I can clean something? Maybe I can lazy load part of the state. Remember, if you consume too much memory, your app will be slow on mobile devices. So just like you lazy load data in your memory and you clean your state. We learn about cleaning the add reducer, remove reducer, another way to clean the state dynamically, but you can also lazy load your modules and their data will be lazy loaded as well. And you can always inspect the amount of memory that your store holds. One of the advantages that we have, that we know where our memory is, that if we use NGRX, the majority of the memory consumed in the heap by our app will be inside the store. So the store you can easily examine the store and see how much memory it consumes. That's about it for the store lesson. Thank you for joining and listening. The next lesson, a really important lesson about reading from the state. Now there's a lot of things that if you read properly, you can improve performance, and what is the recommended change detection strategy to use, and about selectors. And this will be in the next lesson, reading from state. So if you want to make your NGRX store work faster and best practices to reading from the state, you should join in to our next lesson. Thank you for listening.